I never expected my life to unravel over a post-it note. You know those small yellow squares people use for quick reminders? Yeah, one of those was about to turn my world upside down. My name is Jamie, and until last Tuesday, I thought I had it all figured out. Great career, loving husband, and the kind of life that made other people wonder how I managed to keep all the plates spinning. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I just returned from a 3-day business trip to Chicago, dragging my wheeled suitcase through our quiet house at 11 p.m. The lights were off, except for the dim glow of the kitchen under-cabinet lighting we always left on. That's when I saw it, a yellow square stuck to the refrigerator door. Need some time to think. Don't wait up. 8 words. That's all Ethan left me after 12 years together, 5 of them married. I stood there in my wrinkled blazer, still wearing my uncomfortable heels, staring at his handwriting until the letters started to blur. Ethan. I called out anyway, my voice echoing through our empty house. No response, of course. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Ethan. Leave a message. Hey, just got home. Got your note. Call me when you can. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I wasn't standing in our dark kitchen at nearly midnight, talking to his voicemail while my stomach tied itself in knots. I kicked off my heels and walked through the house, flipping on lights as I went. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. His laptop was missing from his usual spot on the coffee table, but otherwise, there were no signs of. What? What was I even looking for? My phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped it in my rush to check the screen. But it was just a text from Helen, my mother-in-law. Hope you had a safe flight home, sweetheart. Lunch tomorrow. I stared at her message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Helen had been more of a mother to me than my own in the past few years. She'd know if something was wrong with Ethan, wouldn't she? Instead of replying, I walked upstairs to our bedroom. Ethan's side of the closet looked untouched, his suits hanging in their usual order. His dresser drawers were closed, his watch still on the nightstand. Everything seemed fine, except for the gnawing feeling in my gut that nothing was fine at all. I changed into one of his old t-shirts, a habit I'd picked up years ago, and sat on our bed, scrolling through my phone. No new messages from Ethan. No missed calls. Just that stupid yellow post-it note downstairs, mocking me with its vagueness. The last time I'd seen him was Sunday morning, before I left for my flight. We'd had coffee together, talked about his mother's upcoming doctor's appointment, made plans for the weekend. Everything had seemed normal. Hadn't it? But now that I thought about it, there had been something off in his smile when he kissed me goodbye. A hesitation in his hug that I'd brushed off as early morning sluggishness. The way he'd lingered in the doorway watching me load my suitcase into the Uber. My phone buzzed again, another text from Helen. Ethan mentioned he might be working late this week. Everything okay? I felt my chest tighten. Working late? Since when did Ethan work late? As an IT consultant, he usually kept regular hours, often working from home. Something wasn't adding up. I typed back quickly, just got home. Everything's fine. Lunch tomorrow sounds great. But as I lay there in our too-empty bed, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning above me, I knew I was lying. Nothing was fine. That little yellow post-it note was just the beginning, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew our life together was about to change forever. I just didn't know how much. The hospital corridor smelled like artificial lemons and broken promises. I'd come straight from work to visit Helen, still wearing my power suit like some kind of corporate armor. The text from the hospital had arrived during my morning meeting. Helen had been admitted after a bad fall. Jamie, sweetheart. Helen's face lit up as I entered her room, though I could see the pain behind her smile. She was propped up against stark white pillows, looking smaller than usual in the hospital bed. You didn't have to rush over. Of course I did. I leaned down to hug her, careful of the 4 in her arm. Have you heard from Ethan? I tried calling him. A flicker of something, confusion, concern, crossed Helen's face. He stopped by briefly this morning. Said he had some work emergency. She paused, studying my face. Is everything all right between you two? I busied myself arranging the flowers I'd brought, buying time to steady my voice. Why do you ask? Mother's intuition, maybe. Helen reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. He seems distracted lately. Not himself. He left me a note last night, I admitted, sinking into the visitor's chair. Said he needed time to think. Hasn't been home since. Helen's monitor beeped steadily in the background as she processed this. That doesn't sound like my son. No, I agreed. It doesn't. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan, sorry about last night. Crazy work situation. Talk soon. I showed Helen the message. She frowned, her fingers tightening around mine. Jamie, there's something. The door opened, and a nurse walked in with Helen's medication. The moment shattered like glass, whatever Helen had been about to say lost in the routine of vital signs and pill cups. Mrs. Lark, how's your pain level? The nurse asked, checking Helen's chart. Oh, manageable, Helen said, but I saw her wince as she shifted position. Though I wouldn't say no to something stronger. While the nurse adjusted Helen's medication, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Greg. Hey, you guys free for dinner Friday? Megan's making her famous lasagna. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Greg and Megan had been our friends since college, but the thought of pretending everything was normal made my stomach churn. Who's that? Helen asked after the nurse left. Greg. Dinner invitation. Go, Helen insisted. You need to get out, not sit here watching me sleep. Besides. She paused, that same strange look crossing her face. Maybe Ethan will actually show up for that. Before I could respond, my phone rang, work calling. I stepped into the hallway to take it, watching through the window as Helen closed her eyes. Her face tight with pain that had nothing to do with her fall. When I returned, Helen was holding a small photo album I recognized from her bedside table at home. Look what Ethan brought this morning, she said, patting the bed beside her. Come see. I sat on the edge of her bed, and she opened the album. There we were, Ethan and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something off camera. I remembered that moment. Greg had tripped over his own feet trying to take the picture. You know what I see when I look at this? Helen asked softly. I see my son looking at you like you're his whole world. Helen. Let me finish. She turned the page. Another photo, this one from Christmas last year. Ethan and I in matching ugly sweaters, his arm around my waist. Something's wrong, isn't it? Something more than just a note. I stared at the photo, at our smiling faces, trying to pinpoint when things had started to change. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm going to find out. Helen closed the album, her hands trembling slightly. Jamie, there's something you should know about. Her monitor suddenly erupted in sharp beeps. Helen's face went pale, her hand clutching her chest. I lunged for the call button as she gasped for breath. Help! I shouted into the hallway. I need help in here. As medical staff rushed in, I was pushed aside, forced to watch helplessly as they worked on Helen. My phone buzzed again, another text from Ethan. But this one wasn't meant for me. Megan's lasagna sat untouched on my plate as I watched Ethan check his phone for the 1000th time that evening. We were at Greg and Megan's house for our usual Friday dinner, but nothing about this felt usual. Sorry, Ethan muttered, sliding his phone back into his pocket. Work stuff. On a Friday night? Greg raised an eyebrow. Man, they're working you too hard. I took a sip of wine, remembering the text I'd glimpsed on Ethan's phone at the hospital. The one that wasn't meant for me, miss you already. Can't wait until Friday. Jamie, how's Helen doing? Megan asked, refilling my glass without waiting for an answer. Her hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of red wine on the white tablecloth. Stable, I said, watching Megan dab at the stain with her napkin. The doctors say she can probably go home next week. That's great news. Greg smiled. We should all visit her this weekend. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He pushed back from the table. Sorry, I need to take this. As he walked onto the back porch, I noticed Megan's eyes following him. She quickly looked away when she caught me watching. So, Greg said, clearly trying to fill the awkward silence, anyone want dessert? Megan made tiramisu. I'll help you get it, Megan offered, practically jumping from her chair. Through the glass doors, I could see Ethan pacing, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. His face was illuminated by his phone screen, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of his expression, not stressed, but smiling. Jamie? Greg's voice snapped me back. You okay? Yeah, just. I gestured vaguely at my barely touched lasagna. Not very hungry. In the kitchen, I heard a glass shatter, followed by Megan's muffled curse. Greg rushed to help her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the view of my husband having what was clearly not a work call. My phone buzzed, a text from Helen, doctors say I can have visitors tomorrow. Will you come? Bring Ethan if you can find him. The sliding door opened, and Ethan returned, slipping his phone away with that same secret smile. Sorry about that. Where's dessert? Megan dropped something, I said, studying his face. Everything okay with work? Yeah, just a server issue. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Nothing major. Greg and Megan returned with the tiramisu, but Megan's eyes were red, and she'd changed her blouse. Everything okay in there? I asked. Fine. Megan's voice was too bright. Just clumsy me, breaking things. As Greg served dessert, I watched the way Megan's hands shook, the way Ethan kept checking his phone under the table. The way neither of them would look directly at anyone else. Actually, I said, standing up, I should probably go. Helen texted about visiting tomorrow, and I need to review some work documents tonight. I'll stay and help clean up, Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. No, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You should come home. We need to talk. The room went silent. Greg looked between us, confusion clear on his face. Megan suddenly became very interested in her dessert. Can it wait? Ethan asked. I promised Greg I'd help him with his new gaming setup. Did you? I turned to Greg. Did he promise that? Greg shifted uncomfortably. We hadn't really. Right. I grabbed my purse. Thanks for dinner, Megan. The lasagna was delicious. Jamie, wait, Ethan started. No. I cut him off. Either come home now, or don't come home at all. Your choice. I walked out before anyone could respond, but through the front window, I saw Megan grab Ethan's arm, shaking her head slightly. He pulled away, but didn't follow me. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, watching the house. The text from the hospital was still open on my phone, miss you already. Can't wait until Friday. Friday. Dinner at Greg and Megan's. My hands stopped shaking as a strange calm settled over me. Now I knew. Now I could plan. Helen had tried to warn me, I realized. Before her attack, she'd been about to tell me something. Something about her son, and possibly about the woman I'd thought was my friend. Well, they wanted to play games. Fine. Game on. Ethan didn't come home that night. Or the next. Our house felt like a museum of someone else's life, photos on walls, mixed up coffee mugs in the cabinet, his shoes still by the door. I spent Saturday morning in my home office, pretending to work while actually scrolling through months of phone records. The hospital called around noon. Jamie? Helen's voice was weak. Could you bring my gray cardigan from home? The one with the pearl buttons? Of course. I was already grabbing my keys. How are you feeling? Better now that I've seen Greg. There was a pause. He stopped by this morning. Alone. My hand froze on the doorknob. Greg came to see you. He seemed worried. Asked some strange questions about you and Ethan. I found Helen's cardigan in her bedroom closet, neatly hung next to other cardigans that all looked exactly the same to me. As I reached for it, something fell from the pocket, a small, leather-bound notebook. Jamie? Helen was still on the line. Are you there? Yeah, sorry. Just found your sweater. I picked up the notebook, recognizing Helen's careful handwriting. I'll be there soon. I hung up and opened the notebook. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Ethan came by today. Something's wrong, he's not himself. Mentioned trouble at work, but I know my son. This is different. When I asked about Jamie, he changed the subject. Megan dropped by later, asking about him. Said Greg was worried too. But the way she asked. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg, can we talk? Alone? I stared at the message, then back at Helen's notebook. The next entry was from 2 weeks ago. Saw them together at Carlton's cafe. They didn't see me. Ethan was holding her hand across the table. My heart breaks for Jamie. Should I tell her? Would she believe me? Another text from Greg, please. It's important. I texted back, coffee shop on 5th. 30 minutes. Greg was already there when I arrived, fidgeting with a paper napkin. He looked like he hadn't slept. I need to tell you something, he said as I sat down. About Megan. And Ethan. I know. He blinked. You do. Not everything. I placed Helen's notebook on the table. But enough. Greg stared at the notebook, then pushed his coffee aside. Last night, after you left. Megan confessed. They've been. He couldn't finish. How long? 6 months. His voice cracked. She says it's over, but the texts are still coming, I finished. The secret meetings. The lies. He nodded, looking destroyed. I found hotel receipts. Credit card statements. They were together when Helen had her attack. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. What are you going to do? I don't know. Greg met my eyes. What are we going to do? Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, back off. You don't want this fight. I showed it to Greg. His face hardened. That's Megan's work phone, he said. She thinks I don't know about it. Another text, some things are better left alone. For Helen's sake. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but rage. They were threatening Helen now. Greg, I said, my voice deadly calm, how good are you still with computers? Good enough. Why? I showed him the threatening texts. Because I think it's time we stop playing defense. He studied my face for a moment, then pulled out his laptop. What do you need? Everything. Bank records, emails, phone logs. Especially from their work accounts. I took Helen's notebook back, clutching it like a weapon. They want to play dirty. Let's show them what dirty really looks like. As Greg started typing, my phone buzzed one more time. A message from Helen. The doctors found something on my latest scan. We need to talk. Soon. I looked at Greg, then at the notebook, then at the threatening texts. Time was running out, and I had to choose: protect Helen, expose the truth, or take revenge. Maybe, with the right plan, I could do all three. The doctor's words hung in the air like smoke: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Helen sat in her hospital bed, calm as ever, while I felt the room spin around me. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask. "A few weeks." Helen reached for my hand. "I didn't want to add to your troubles." My phone buzzed, another work email about the upcoming Thanksgiving conference in New York. I was supposed to give the keynote speech, a career-defining moment. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Does Ethan know?" Helen's silence was answer enough. She hadn't told him, and he hadn't been around to notice. "I'll cancel my trip," I said. "The conference can find another speaker." "Absolutely not." Helen's grip tightened. "I won't have you sacrificing your career. Ethan can take care of me." I almost laughed at that. Ethan, who hadn't been home in days. Ethan, who was too busy with Megan to visit his own mother in the hospital. My phone buzzed again. Greg this time, found something in their emails. "You need to see this." "Jamie?" Helen's voice pulled me back. "There's something else you should know." Before she could continue, Ethan walked in. He looked surprised to see me, like he'd been hoping to avoid exactly this scenario. "Mom," he said, barely glancing my way. "How are you feeling?" "Like I have cancer," Helen replied dryly. "But you'd know that if you'd been here when the doctors explained everything." Ethan flinched. "I've been busy with work." I finished for him. "Strange, since Greg mentioned your company's been on holiday schedule this week." The tension in the room could have powered a small city. Ethan's phone chimed, that familiar sound that made my stomach turn. "You should get that," I said. "Might be important." Helen watched this exchange with knowing eyes. "Ethan, why don't you get me some water?" Once he left, Helen pulled something from under her pillow, an envelope. "I wrote this weeks ago, when I first suspected everything. Don't open it yet. Wait until after Thanksgiving. Helen. Promise me." Her voice was steel. "And promise you'll go to that conference." "I have my reasons." My phone lit up with Greg's messages. Email trail shows hotel bookings. Financial transfers. They're planning something over Thanksgiving. Ethan returned with the water, and his phone chimed again. This time, I caught a glimpse of the screen. Everything's arranged for next week. Once she's in New York. The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. They were waiting for me to leave town. Planning something while I was gone. "I should go," I said, standing. "Need to prepare for the conference." "You're still going?" Ethan asked too quickly. "Of course." I smiled, channeling every business negotiation I'd ever conducted. "It's important for my career." "You'll take care of Helen, right?" He nodded, relief visible on his face. "Of course." I hugged Helen goodbye, feeling the envelope crinkle between us. "I'll see you after Thanksgiving." In the hallway, I texted Greg, "Need a favor. How good are you at accessing security cameras?" His response was immediate, "Already on it." "What's the plan?" I looked back through the hospital room window. Helen was showing Ethan her notebook, the decoy one I'd planted earlier, not the real one in my purse. Ethan was falling for it, just like he'd fall for my apparent departure for New York. "They think I'm leaving town," I wrote to Greg. "Let's give them exactly what they want." Another text from Megan's burner phone arrived, "Smart choice about the conference. Some distances are better kept." I clutched Helen's envelope, my decision crystallizing. They thought they were setting a trap, but they just walked into mine. "One more thing," I texted Greg. "Book me a hotel room in New York. Make sure everyone knows about it. Let them think they had me figured out. Let them think I was running away." Thanksgiving was going to be interesting this year. The security footage from our house played on Greg's laptop, showing Ethan and Megan entering at 2 a.m. I watched from my rental car parked across the street, where I'd been since supposedly leaving for New York yesterday. "They're in your bedroom," Greg's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Want me to kill the feed?" "No." My voice sounded strange, even to me. "Keep recording." My phone lit up with a text from Helen's nurse, "Mrs. Lark asking for you. Says it's urgent." I gripped the steering wheel harder, torn between two betrayals unfolding simultaneously. The one in my bedroom and the one at the hospital, where Ethan hadn't visited Helen once since I left. "Jamie," Greg warned, "they're accessing your home office computer." Of course they were. The fake financial documents I'd left there would keep them busy. What they didn't know was that every keystroke was being logged, every file access recorded. Another text from Helen's nurse, "Doctor says her condition is deteriorating rapidly." "Greg," I said, "send me the hospital's security feed." The split screen on my phone showed two scenes, my bedroom and Helen's hospital room. My husband and his lover rifling through my personal files while my mother-in-law lay alone, fighting for her life. Helen's envelope sat heavy in my jacket pocket, still unopened. "Wait until after Thanksgiving," she'd said. But watching her now, alone in that hospital bed, I couldn't wait any longer. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Jamie. By now you know about Ethan and Megan. What you don't know is why I've been protecting them. The cancer isn't new, I've known for months. Ethan discovered something in the insurance paperwork. Something that could ruin everything. Your company's health insurance, which covers me as a dependent, has a clause about pre-existing conditions. If they discover I knew about the cancer before the policy took effect." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Helen had kept quiet about her diagnosis to protect my career, while Ethan and Megan had been using this information to. "Movement in your office," Greg interrupted. "They're accessing your work emails." On the hospital feed, Helen's monitors started beeping erratically. Medical staff rushed into her room. "Jamie," Greg's voice was urgent, "they're sending emails from your account. Something about insurance fraud." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They weren't just having an affair, they were setting me up. Using Helen's condition to manufacture a fraud case against me. Once I was discredited and fired, Helen would lose her insurance coverage. My phone rang, the hospital's number. "Mrs. Lark is asking for you," the nurse said. "She's very agitated. The doctor says." In my bedroom, Ethan and Megan were celebrating, champagne in hand. My champagne. My bed. My life. "The doctor says she may not make it through the night." I started the car, then stopped. If I went to the hospital, I'd lose the evidence I needed to stop them. If I stayed, I might lose Helen. "Greg," I said, "send everything to my lawyer." "Everything. Already done." "But Jamie, there's something else." Something in their emails about Helen's original diagnosis. The hospital feed showed Helen reaching for her phone, her hands shaking. My phone buzzed with her message. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner. The insurance. It wasn't just about me. Check the dates on Ethan's first email to Megan. The day I got my diagnosis. The day your company announced your promotion. The day everything started falling apart." In my bedroom, Ethan raised his glass in a mock toast, unaware he was being recorded. Unaware that his mother was dying. Unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to backfire. But as I sat there, watching both screens, I realized I couldn't win this one. Not completely. Whatever I chose, justice or mercy, revenge or protection, I would lose something precious. Helen's monitor flatlined. And I made my choice. I walked into my house exactly 36 minutes after Helen's heart stopped. The champagne bottle still sat empty on my bedroom floor, but Ethan and Megan had moved to the kitchen. I could hear their laughter floating up the stairs as I silently made my way to my office. My laptop was still open, emails drafted and ready to send that would destroy my career. Evidence of insurance fraud carefully constructed to look like I'd known about Helen's condition all along. Their perfect plan. I pressed send on my own email, the one containing every recorded minute of their betrayal, copied to the board of directors, HR, and Greg's lawyer. Then I walked downstairs. "You're supposed to be in New York," Ethan said, freezing with a wine glass halfway to his lips. Megan dropped her phone, face draining of color. "Helen's dead." My voice didn't shake. "She died alone because her son was too busy trying to destroy his wife to visit his dying mother." Ethan's face went through a series of emotions, shock, grief, guilt, before settling on something harder. "Jamie, whatever you think you know. I know everything." I pulled out my phone, playing the security footage of them in my office. Every email. Every meeting. Every plan to use Helen's illness to frame me for fraud. Megan stepped forward, hands raised. "We can explain." "Can you explain this?" I played Helen's final voice message, the one she'd recorded just before her heart gave out. Her voice filled the kitchen. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I told them everything. About the original diagnosis, about your plan with Megan. About the real insurance fraud, the one you committed 3 years ago." Ethan lunged for my phone, but I was ready. I stepped back, watching his face contort as his mother's confession continued. "You used my illness twice," Helen's voice accused. "Once to embezzle from your company, hiding the transactions under my medical bills. And now to frame Jamie when she got too close to discovering it." "Turn it off," Ethan growled. "Why?" "Afraid to hear how your mother spent her final hours making sure the truth came out." Megan grabbed her purse, heading for the door, but Greg was already there. He'd been waiting outside, and now he blocked the only exit. "Going somewhere?" he asked his wife. "The board has everything," I said, watching Ethan's face as it all crumbled around him. "The real fraud evidence. The affair. Helen's statement. They're probably reading it right now." Ethan's phone started ringing. Then Megan's. Then mine. "You don't understand," Ethan pleaded, suddenly desperate. "I did it for Mom. The insurance wouldn't cover her experimental treatments. So you stole the money," I finished. "I would have helped you, Ethan. We could have found another way." "And then what?" he spat. "Watch you play the hero while I remained the failing son. Watch my dying mother love you more than me." His words hung in the air, revealing the real betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of himself. My phone buzzed again, the hospital, asking about Helen's arrangements. In the end, she'd chosen me as her medical proxy, not Ethan. Her final act of trust. "The police will be here soon," Greg said quietly. "The board's filing charges." Megan started crying, but Ethan just stood there, staring at the phone still playing his mother's voice. His final message from her, and it was a testimony against him. "I could have forgiven the affair," I said, turning to leave. "But using your mother's death as a weapon? That's something Helen never forgave you for, and neither will I." "Jamie, wait," Ethan called out, but I was already walking away. Outside, the November air was sharp with coming snow. My phone showed dozens of missed calls, the board, the police, the hospital. The next few hours would be chaos. But as I got in my car, I noticed one last unread message from Helen, sent moments before she died. "Remember, sweetheart, sometimes the best revenge is living well." I started the engine, leaving Ethan and Megan to face the consequences of their choices. Helen had taught me that justice and revenge aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they're better. 6 months after Helen's funeral, I stood in her garden, surrounded by the spring flowers she'd planted last fall. Her final gift, blooming in defiance of everything that had happened. The house sale was closing today. Ethan wouldn't be there, he couldn't be, given the conditions of his plea deal. The embezzlement charges had stuck, even if Megan had managed to avoid prosecution by turning state's evidence. "Last box," Greg said, carrying a carefully wrapped photo album to my car. He'd been my rock through all of this, even as he navigated his own divorce from Megan. "Found something you should see," he added, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It was hidden behind Helen's bedroom mirror. The envelope was dated 3 days before her death, addressed to me in her elegant handwriting. Inside was a key and a letter. "My dearest Jamie. By the time you read this, you'll know everything. About Ethan's betrayal, about Megan, about the money. But there's one last thing you don't know, something I've kept hidden for 30 years. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National. What you find there might help you understand why I wasn't surprised by Ethan's actions. Some patterns repeat across generations, but you've shown me they can also be broken. You were the daughter I always wanted. Remember that. Love, Helen." My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. Ethan signed the divorce papers. "It's done." I looked at the key in my hand, then at the blooming garden. Helen had known, not just about Ethan's recent betrayals, but about something deeper, older. Something she'd kept hidden until she was sure I was strong enough to handle it. "Want company?" Greg asked, noticing my expression. I shook my head. "This one I need to do alone." The bank was quiet when I arrived. The safety deposit box contained a single manila envelope, thick with documents. On top was another note from Helen. The truth about Ethan's father, and why I never told anyone how he really died. My hands shook as I read the decades-old police reports, newspaper clippings, and Helen's private journals. The pattern she'd mentioned became clear, a history of financial fraud, betrayal, and secrets that had shaped both mother and son. But Helen had broken the cycle. She'd chosen truth over protection in the end, chosen justice over family loyalty. Chosen me. My phone buzzed again, work this time. The promotion I'd been worried about losing had turned into a CEO position at a competing firm. Life had a way of surprising you. As I drove home, I passed the street where Megan now lived alone, where Greg was rebuilding his life, where Ethan had lost everything. The revenge I'd wanted had come naturally, without me having to orchestrate it. Helen had taught me that too. Sometimes justice works best when you step back and let truth do its work. At home, I found one last surprise, a small package from Helen's lawyer. Inside was a set of garden tools and seeds, with a final note. "For your new beginning. Some gardens grow better after a fire." I stood in my backyard, holding the seeds Helen had chosen for me months ago, planning for a future she wouldn't see but had helped create. The spring air was thick with possibility. My phone lit up with another text, an unknown number. For a moment, I tensed, remembering those threatening messages from months ago. But this was different. "Thank you for the flowers on Mom's grave. You were a better child to her than I ever was. E." I didn't respond. Some conversations were better left in the past. Instead, I knelt in the soft earth and began to plant Helen's seeds, understanding finally what she'd meant about patterns and choices. About revenge and grace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about growing something new in the ashes of what was lost. I dug my hands into the soil and began my new chapter, Helen's last lesson blooming around me like a garden after rain.
It seems like yesterday when I think back to the day I met him. With a notebook tucked under my arm and a new semester underway, I was an excited young person dreaming of becoming a top-tier designer in a college that was bursting with activity. And then there was Jake, all charisma and lofty aspirations, talking loudly about how one election might change the world. We had an instant connection as two driven individuals who just cared about our future. "Hey, you're in my intro to design class, right?" he'd inquired as he caught up to me on the campus walkway, exchanging huge smiles. With a cheeky edge to my voice, I shot back, "Yeah, That's me, attempting to make sense of it all. I get it. But hey, if you ever need a study buddy or someone to run ideas by, I'm your guy. His confidence was extraordinary, nearly to the point where it was easy to forget he was just a student like myself. It was us against the world from that point on. He would often talk endlessly about political theories over coffee and textbooks, while I would scribble in the margins of my notes. As a team, nothing seemed insurmountable to us. We're going to do really well, Anita. I promise. On those exhausting nights, he said, you'll be designing national galleries, and I'll be right there, maybe as governor, making sure the arts get the funding they deserve. His eyes shone with a mix of ambition and naivete. And what about the children? White picket fence. What is it? I mocked, seeing his expression. He would gesture dismissively. No, not for us. Plans are larger than this. When you can own the entire city, who needs a fence? Everything was very romantic in the idealistic, carefree sense of youth. We had a little ceremony with only a few friends and relatives before we graduated. It felt appropriate, like we weren't simply getting married, but embarking on an adventure together. Being newlyweds, we had no limits. In a short period of time, Jake rose from assistant to aide to the governor to director of parks and recreation. It seems as though he was receiving new recognition or moving up the professional ladder every month. He was always the center of attention, shaking hands and kissing infants like a pro. It was different at home. "How was your day?" became our go-to opening line for discussions. He would say, "Busy as hell, meetings back to back." "How about you, sweetheart? How is your treatment in the design world?" I would shrug, seeming casual. "Oh, you know, just another day of picking colors and convincing clients I know best." Though his eyes were always far away from mine, he would still laugh. Considering that we were both working hard, I didn't mind. I returned home one evening with my head spinning from closing a significant contract that would position our department as leaders in the field. I was worn out, and my shoulders hurt from carrying my laptop bag around all day. Jake was home already, something that was becoming less common these days. I sealed the deal with Johnson. The presentation went off without a hitch. I declared, attempting to share a small portion of my day and searching for a glimmer of mutual enthusiasm. Jake remarked, "That's nice, babe," without taking his eyes off the papers strewn all over the living room. "Listen, since today was less demanding, could you prepare dinner?" I barely had time for lunch because I had so many meetings back to back. Half off, I hesitated at the doorway. Lighter day kept repeating in my thoughts. More light? "Jake, we fought for 8 hours to get a deal that will increase our revenue for the whole year." When he did look up, he shrugged and met my eyes. "Yes, but are you really in the trenches all the time? All it takes is choosing colors and persuading others to agree with your viewpoints." The tone of dismissal hurt more than I thought it would. "Jake, it goes a little beyond that. We had a major victory with this." With a muttered, sure, he returned to his papers. "But can you actually manage dinner? I'm worn out." His casual comments overshadowed my victory, leaving me with a bad taste in my mouth as I made my way to the kitchen. After a few weeks, the pattern persisted. At work, I was moving up the ladder and earning more money and responsibilities at every step. I had conflicting emotions the day I learned that my pay had exceeded Jake's. Knowing his mental state at the moment made me hesitant to tell him about it even though I wanted to. At last, during a dinner, I'd brought up the subject, making an effort to keep it light-hearted. "It appears that I may be out-earning you this year with the new accounts I brought in. It's funny, huh?" With an indiscernible grimace, Jake set down his fork. Are you serious? Is that the method you intend to discuss it? His tone perplexed me, so I scowled. Jake, bring what up? The news is good. It indicates that both of us are doing well. It isn't us, Anita. You are the one. I now have to figure out how to take charge. I can't let people believe I'm incapable of providing. Attempting to close the distance his comments had caused, I reached across the table. It's not a competition, Jake. Our money is set aside for our future. Shaking his head, he withdrew his hand. It's not really that easy. I think this is significant, but you don't comprehend it. His remarks were like a slap in the face, undermining not only my work, but also our collaboration. Jake, I felt like we were in this together. When did it start to focus only on you? Ever since I became the one left behind, he shot back, raising his voice. There you are, out-turning me now with your clever deals. What does that mean about me? It makes you my husband. I uttered in a forceful yet gentle tone, not my competitor. Jake snorted and got up quickly. I have to consider this. Consider exploring alternative options, perhaps one with a higher salary. I felt the distance grow as I watched him leave. It was about respect, understanding, and support, elements that were increasingly lacking in our conversations, rather than money or success. I turned over the conversation of the day as I lay in bed that night. We were sharing a roof, but our paths seemed to be leading us to different places entirely. Though I wasn't sure what or how at the time, I knew something had to give. All I knew was that I could not let his fears to control me or our pleasure. But resolving that, I was still puzzled by that puzzle. After 15 years of marriage, our life was an exhibit of external success, a gorgeous home, well-maintained vehicles, a few properties scattered throughout the city, and bank accounts that would make anyone jealous. However, not everything that shines is made of gold, and Jake felt that the shine was beginning to fade. After working for the Natural Resources Agency for a considerable amount of time, his career seemed to be stuck in mud, spinning its wheels but not moving forward. I would sit through another long, drunken evening listening to him yell, Anita, everything is rigged. The guys who can't distinguish a policy from a pancake are going to get the positions I deserve. It's all about who you know, or who you know. You know, he would complain while taking a swig. I did my best to provide answers rather than just a listening ear. Have you considered going out with someone? One evening, while clearing the dinner dishes and refilling his glass, I offered that a therapist would be of assistance. Jake struck the table with his fist, causing the silverware to fly. Anita, I don't need a shrink. The corruption and cronyism I have to deal with on a daily basis is the issue, not me. I pressed on, feeling the weight of his aggravation as my own. But maybe talking to someone could help you cope better or even strategize how to get around those obstacles. I said, will you just put it down? I am aware of my duties. It's the system that needs to change, not me. No matter how hard I tried, I was unable to get past his fury. So I concentrated on my career, which I could control. Leading my squad in international displays, I was creating waves. Major contracts were featuring my designs as their focal point. At work, I was valued and my opinions counted, which felt really fantastic. But Jake withdrew even further as I prospered. He stopped coming to work functions with me, especially the large, flashy ones where my accomplishments were on display. Why don't you attend tomorrow night's gala? One evening, I asked him, trying not to seem too serious. I would find great meaning in it. Additionally, the CEO will be present, so you might network. With a resolute expression on his face, Jake raised his gaze from his laptop. And what's that? Remain motionless as all eyes acclaim you. These days, I think they only recognize me as Mr. Anita. That is untrue. I responded with a stab of pain in my chest. Jake, you are my spouse. They appreciate that you are an individual. He snorted and snapped shut his laptop. Yes, Anita. I'm just the man who holds your handbag to them. I've got better things to do, so no thanks. I didn't want to admit how much it hurt. Although I was happy with my accomplishments, I wanted my spouse to be by my side and enjoy the achievement together, not feel jealous of it. I experienced a mixture of emotions when I put on my evening gown and glanced in the mirror the following day. My reflection revealed a woman who, while professionally fulfilled, lacked her husband's support in a big way on a personal level. I went alone, as I had started to do more often. The gala was a blur of congratulations, handshakes, and bright smiles. I accepted the accolades and spoke about my latest designs, but each time I saw a couple together, laughing or sharing a quiet moment, my heart ached. Returning home, I found Jake on the couch, a bottle in hand, not even pretending to have waited up. The clock was ticking past 9:00 p.m. as I rushed out of the conference room, my phone dead from the day's back-to-back meetings. My mind was racing with the discussions we'd had, but a nagging thought about Jake waiting at home made my heart race faster. We hadn't spoken since the morning, and I knew he'd be wondering where I was. I drove home as quickly as I could, rehearsing an apology in my mind. But when I walked through the front door, the coldness in Jake's eyes told me no apology would suffice. "You're late," he stated flatly, his voice edged with accusation as he sat in the dimly lit living room. "I'm sorry, Jake. The meeting ran over, and my phone died. I didn't get a chance to call." I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, my voice weary. "Meeting, huh? Where should I say?" "Your little party with the bosses." His words were sharp, his eyes narrowing. I was taken aback. "What are you talking about?" "It was just a regular business meeting, Jake." "Sure it was. I bet it's all those late nights with them that got you where you are. Not your talent, just playing up to the bosses." His voice was bitter, and he took a swig from the bottle next to him. My cheeks flushed with anger and disbelief. "You think I got my promotions by what? Sleeping around? How can you even say that?" He laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Oh, come on, Anita. It's obvious. Why else would they promote you, a woman, over others?" The accusation stung, and I felt a mix of hurt and fury. I'd earned my position with hard work and talent. It's disgusting that you think so low of me. Jake stood up abruptly, his body swaying slightly. "You're never here, always working, leaving me alone. And we don't even have kids because you're too busy with your career." His words were like slaps, each one hitting hard. "I can't believe you're blaming me for no kids. We agreed on this, Jake. My career is not an excuse for your unhappiness or failures." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "My failures? No, Anita. They're because I married someone who cares more about her job than her husband. You've ruined everything." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Jake, this isn't us. We're both upset. Maybe we should talk about this in the morning when you're sober." "No, I'm done. I need to be alone." He grabbed his keys and headed toward the door. "Jake, wait." But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. I tried calling him several times, but it went straight to voicemail. Alone in the house, I wandered from room to room, each one echoing with the ghosts of earlier, happier times. I couldn't sleep, The couch was cold and unwelcoming, his accusations replaying in my mind. The morning after Jake stormed out, I dragged myself to work. My eyes were red from a sleepless night, my mind swirling with the harsh words and the slam of the door echoing in my ears. I was on autopilot, nodding and smiling where needed, but inside, I felt like I was crumbling. Mid-morning, my boss called me into his office. I straightened my blazer and tried to compose myself, wiping away the last traces of tears. "Anita, I got something that might interest you," he said, his tone more upbeat than I could handle at that moment. "How would you like to head our new project in Milan? It's a big opportunity, international exposure, leading a team." I thought of you immediately. Milan, Italy had always been a dream, one of those places I'd promised myself I'd visit one way or another. Under different circumstances, I would have jumped at the chance, no second thoughts. "That sounds incredible, sir," I managed, a genuine smile breaking through the fog of my sadness. "It's actually a dream of mine to work in Milan." "Great. I knew you'd be excited. Think it over and let me know your decision." Returning home, I found Jake sitting at the kitchen table, looking sober but somber. The air between us was thick with unsaid words. I hesitated at the doorway, then decided to breach the silence. "Jake, we need to talk. I was offered a major project today. It's in Milan." I began, watching his reaction closely. He looked up, his face hardening. "Milan, huh? And what? You're just going to go?" "It's a big deal for my career, Jake. It could change everything for us, for me. I want to take it." I tried to keep my voice steady, assertive. "There's no us in this, Anita. It's always about you and your career." His voice rose, a bitter edge slicing through the quiet of the kitchen. "I'm still the same person, Jake. I'm still your wife. Why can't you see this as something good for both of us?" I pleaded, hoping for some sliver of understanding. "There is no both of us. If you choose to go to Milan, it's me or the job. Anita, decide." His ultimatum hung in the air, stark and cold. "Why do you make me choose, Jake? Why can't you be happy for me?" My voice cracked, frustration and pain bubbling up. "Because I need to know where I stand. Either you're with me, or you're there living your dream without me." He was yelling now, his face red with anger. I took a deep breath, my mind made up, heart aching. "I choose Milan. I have to do this, Jake, not just for my career, but for myself." Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. He stormed to our bedroom and came back with a stack of papers, divorce papers, slamming them down on the table. He met my eyes with cold finality. "Then this is it, Anita. If you go, we're done." My heart sank as I gazed at the documents and then at him, yet something inside of me hardened. Not even for him could I give up on my aspirations. The following week was a haze. I quickly packed my luggage, signed the paperwork, and boarded the jet to Milan. Every corner of the city was a picture-perfect postcard. It was stunning. I was frequently seen on TV talking about the project, my professional demeanor belying my inner distress. Even with all the excitement, my mind kept going back to Jake and the chance of things being better. But every time I took up my phone to give him a call, I was reminded of his warning and my determination grew. It felt strange to return home after spending 2 weeks in Milan, yet there he was, Jake, lounging on the sofa as though the previous month had been a small bump in the road. "Anita, you've returned," he said. "Come here," getting up from the couch and holding out his arms while wearing a fake smile. I stepped forward but kept my distance, since I couldn't bear to think about his threats and ultimatums anymore. Jake, we can't act as like nothing occurred. Remember that ultimatum you gave me? Me or the position? His voice was light as he waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that. You know, I was just freaked out. However, I'm willing to start afresh because I've had time to reflect. If you'll agree to change, I'm willing to forgive you. My brows furrowed. Pardon me? For precisely what purpose? For pursuing my line of work. And what modifications are you referring to? Jake's face became a little more stern. Anita, you know, give it go and concentrate on us. We could return to our previous state if you would simply listen to me and follow my instructions. Then it dawned on me how utterly ridiculous and manipulative his remarks were. Anger at his insolence mixed with relief that I was finally realizing the manipulation for what it was. Jake, you can't be serious. You're expecting me to forfeit everything of my hard-earned success. I can't do that, you know that. With a tight, icy laugh, he laughed. It was worthwhile to try, but I assumed you would understand. I guess I was mistaken. The divorce papers that he had tossed at me before I left were inside my bag when I reached inside it. Jake, I signed these. Regarding the divorce, I believed you to be sincere. It appears that I was correct. With a faltering smile, he grabbed the papers out of my hand. Anita, this was merely a joke. Can't you laugh at yourself? A jest? I looked at him, astonished. Divorce threats were a joke. Absurd. Jake's voice rose as his face flushed. Anita, you're making a grave error. This is something you'll regret. I will not allow you to simply leave and wreck everything. I'm not causing any damage. I'm preserving myself. I stated strongly. You've made it apparent how I feel about you. I have to move on at this point. With a fierce voice, he towered over me. All right. However, you're not leaving with anything. This is my home and possessions. You take off empty-handed. I'll see to it that everyone learns how you achieve success. I'll obliterate you. My heart was racing, but I responded calmly. Try it, and it'll backfire. I have not acted improperly. I have a clear conscience. I went to our bedroom and packed my things, including my design portfolios, personal documents, and a few clothes. The rest was irrelevant. Things were replaceable, but self-respect and peace of mind were not. I headed to my lawyer's office the morning after leaving the house, a flurry of plans and feelings racing through my head. Upon entering Mr. Carter's office, I noticed that he was examining some documents with his glasses resting on the tip of his nose. With a solemn gaze, he looked up. It's lovely to see you, Anita. Please take a seat. Tell me everything. Taking a deep breath, I began to recall the events of the past several days, including all of the nasty remarks and threats that Jake had directed at me. I said, sounding more composed than I actually was, and then he told me he'd make sure I wouldn't get a penny and would ruin my reputation. Mr. Carter listened and took notes, his brow furrowed. Anita, we have to treat this seriously. Have you given hiring a private investigator any thought? We may discover information that will be useful to us in court. I laughed bitterly, which surprised even me. Mr. Carter, I'm ahead of you there. A few months ago, when things really started to go south, I hired one. I wasn't comfortable with what was going on behind my back. I reached into my purse, took out a folder containing papers and pictures, and gave it to him. This is where everything is. It appears that Jake has abused people verbally as well. Mr. Carter unfolded the folder and started going through the contents very carefully. His look as he thumbed through the pictures and reports went from worried to downright shocked. This is This is substantial proof, Anita. He has accepted bribes in exchange for approving specific city projects. He gestured to a picture. And this as well. He gestured to a picture of him and his helper at an unprofessional gathering. Yes, and she has been more than just an assistant for quite some time, I said, with a mixture of relief and guilt. Mr. Carter looked at me through his glasses as he leaned back and pressed his fingers together. Everything is changed by this. We may have extra grounds for divorce in addition to a compelling case based on adultery. This evidence, along with his threats against you, could tip the scales in your favor. The days before the trial were stressful. Jake started to call more frequently and urgently. He would swear at my name and then beg me to come back. I kept track of every voicemail and missed call that I received. When the hearing started, Mr. Carter was unyielding. Your Honor, we have sufficient evidence here pertaining to Mr. Thompson's criminal acts relating to his position at the Natural Resources Agency, in addition to his infidelity, which has crushed my client. As Mr. Carter unfolded paper after document and photo after photo, all the while reliving his threats against me, Jake's face became white. When Jake's turn came around, he attempted to refute the allegations. These are all unfounded charges. She's jealous and trying to destroy my career. The judge was unimpressed when she peered over the rim of her glasses. We have a good deal of evidence in front of us, Mr. Thompson. Could you please clarify these pictures and these transactions? His voice wavered, his customary charm crumbling beneath the weight of indisputable evidence. Just going about my business. Those images are not relevant. However, it was already too late. The proof was overwhelming. The judge paused for a moment before speaking, her voice clear and powerful. In light of the evidence, I am providing Mrs. Thompson with monetary compensation to ease the suffering brought on by the infidelity and threats. The property will be divided equally. I finally put the past behind me and pushed myself into my profession with a zeal I hadn't felt in years. My hard work eventually paid off, and I received an offer to become the creative director. It fulfilled a dream. For years, I had eyed. My closest friend Laura and I were out enjoying this new beginning at a quaint little cafe downtown when my phone chimed. My heart no longer skipped a beat when I saw Jake's name on screen. I murmured to Laura, it's Jake, and held up the phone. She inquired, raising an eyebrow with that all too familiar, "Are you serious?" expression. "Are you going to answer it?" she said. I said, "When do you want?" Jake, giving in to my curiosity. "Hello, Anita. I've been pondering. I recognized that I had erred greatly. Can we get together? I want to discuss the possibility of beginning anew." A mixture of desperation and feebly sincere sound, Jake's voice emerged from the speaker. I couldn't resist laughing out loud. It was more of a, "Can you believe this guy?" kind of laugh than a happy one. Make a fresh start? Assume that, Jake. Following everything? Anita, everything has changed. I lost my job. She accepted everything, including the job, and now she refuses to return the gifts as well. In his rush, his words tumbled over one other. I'm left with nothing. I shook my head, continuing to laugh. So to be clear, you want to start again since she fired you and stole your job, right? That is quite wealthy. You don't get it, Jake. Anita? I've changed. I truly have, I begged. I've moved on, even if that's true. Now that I'm a creative director, my life is content and fulfilled even without you. I remarked, the finality in my voice reflecting the resolution in my heart. There's no place for you in it anymore. But Anita, I wish you the best. Jake, goodbye. I switched off my phone, hung up, and blocked his number. Laura had a proud smile on her face as she looked at me. Raising her wine glass in a toast, she asked, "You really are over him, aren't you?" "Yes, exactly," I replied as I clinked her glass with mine. "To new beginnings, and to being in charge of my own happiness." The following day, I felt strong and in need of company that just asked for love in return. So I made the decision to grow my small family. When I visited the neighborhood shelter, I noticed a rumpled terrier mix. Like me, he was a little older and a little rough around the edges. It felt appropriate to adopt him. I gave him the name Buddy, since I knew he would be a loyal buddy without any strings attached. Life was pleasant. It was authentic. It was mine. And there were a lot of opportunities there. Now that I had weathered the storm, I was thriving instead of merely existing.
The conference room buzzed with chatter as I glanced at my phone, its screen lighting up with an incoming call from Tyler. I stepped out into the hallway, expecting the usual small talk. "How's the trip? When will you be home?" Instead, Tyler's voice came through cold and smug. "I'm divorcing you," he said, his tone almost triumphant. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Enjoy that." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The audacity of it, the complete lack of remorse, it was almost laughable. My hand tightened around the phone as his words sunk in. "You sold the apartment?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah," he said with a dry laugh. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway." Nicole. The name stung, though I'd suspected for months that there was someone else. Tyler's late nights, his sudden work trips, and the mounting distance between us all pointed to a third party. But to hear him speak her name so casually, as if I were the intruder in their life, lit a fire in my chest. "Sounds good," I replied evenly. There was no way I was giving him the satisfaction of hearing me crack. "My name is Amelia, and up until that phone call, I thought I'd married a man I could trust. Tyler and I had been together for 6 years, and while things hadn't always been perfect, I'd believed in our partnership. We'd worked hard to buy our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in the city that I'd fallen in love with the moment I saw it. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of everything we'd built together. Or at least that's what I'd thought. Looking back, there had been signs, small cracks in the foundation I'd ignored. Tyler's dismissive attitude whenever I asked about finances, his tendency to brush off my concerns with a charming smile and a quick kiss. I'd always assumed his confidence came from knowing what he was doing. Now I realized it came from knowing he could manipulate me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding at all the right moments while my mind raced. Tyler thought he'd won. He thought he could pull the rug out from under me, sell the home I'd worked so hard for, and walk away scot-free. But there was one crucial detail he didn't know. The apartment deed had been in my name alone for months. I'd had it transferred after we refinanced earlier in the year, a move Tyler had agreed to without much thought, because it meant a lower interest rate. He'd never bothered to ask about the details, or read the paperwork he'd signed. His carelessness was going to be his undoing. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, my shock had turned into resolve. I wasn't going to cry or beg. Tyler wanted a fight? Fine. But this was a fight I was going to win. The first call I made was to Chloe, my lawyer and longtime friend. I laid out the situation in painstaking detail, my voice calm even as my pulse raced. "He sold the apartment?" she repeated, incredulous. "Does he even realize that he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I said, a hint of amusement creeping into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Nicole." Chloe laughed dryly. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is invalid. You can prove sole ownership, and if he's taken any money from the buyer, he's on the hook for fraud. The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. What do we need to do? I asked. First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal, Chloe said. Then, we'll draft a formal letter for Tyler, outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Tyler thought he'd outsmarted me, that he'd left me powerless and scrambling. But in reality, he'd just set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. I spent the rest of the trip focusing on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions and channeling my energy into the task ahead. The betrayal hurt, but the prospect of reclaiming my life and watching Tyler's smugness crumble gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When I boarded the plane home, I was ready to face Tyler, ready to dismantle his lies, and ready to start a new chapter without him. This wasn't just about winning. It was about taking back control. The flight home gave me hours to think about how everything had unraveled. Tyler's arrogance was astounding. He hadn't even tried to hide his betrayal, as if I was just another obstacle to bulldoze on his path to freedom. But instead of spiraling into anger, I focused on what I'd do when I returned. Tyler thought I was powerless, but he didn't realize I'd been playing the long game without even knowing it. As the plane touched down, my first call was to Chloe. "I'm back," I said as I hauled my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," she replied, her tone brisk and efficient. They were shocked, to say the least, and not too happy with Tyler. They're willing to cooperate, which helps our case. "And Tyler?" I asked. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," she said. "It outlines the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to be furious." Good, I thought. Let him stew. When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Tyler's things were still there, his jackets draped over the chair, his shoes carelessly tossed by the door, but the place felt different, like the energy had shifted. I took a deep breath and set my suitcase down, knowing that the confrontation would come soon enough. Sure enough, Tyler came storming in that evening, his face red with anger and his phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter Chloe had sent. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." "No, Tyler," I said calmly, crossing my arms. "It's not. The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze, his face a mixture of confusion and rage. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed the deed from the file I'd pulled earlier, holding it up for him to see. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or did you just skim the paperwork like you always do?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then his expression twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart." I stared at him, unblinking. "The sale is already void, Tyler. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to take legal action if you don't return the money. Oh, and speaking of money..." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "If you've spent a single cent of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble." Tyler's confidence wavered for the first time. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice steady. "You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive to notice what you're doing. But guess what, Tyler? I've been paying attention, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." He started pacing, his frustration mounting. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here?" I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay here for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Tyler's anger turned into desperation. He called me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that alternated between begging and threatening. Meanwhile, Chloe worked behind the scenes to ensure that every loose end was tied up. The buyer rescinded the agreement, furious at Tyler for wasting their time and money, and Chloe drafted the preliminary paperwork for the divorce proceedings. "You're in a good position, Amelia," she told me during one of our meetings. "Tyler has no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the fraud charges hanging over his head, he'll have to cooperate if he wants to avoid a bigger mess." Her words were a relief, but they also reminded me just how much I'd allowed Tyler to control my life. For years, I'd ignored his dismissiveness and arrogance, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, I saw how much I'd been giving up, and I was determined to take it all back. Lauren, my best friend, came over one evening to help me reorganize the apartment. We boxed up Tyler's things, carefully stacking them in the corner of the living room. "How's he taking all this?" she asked, holding up one of his gaudy ties with a smirk. "Not well," I said, laughing despite myself. "He's still convinced he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging." "Good," she said, tossing the tie into the box. "He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time." I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for her support. For so long, I'd felt alone in my marriage, carrying the emotional and financial burden while Tyler took credit for everything. But now, I had people in my corner, and that made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place the day Tyler brought Nicole to the apartment. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing some paperwork when they walked in like they owned the place. Nicole looked around with a smug smile, her arm looped through Tyler's. "So, this is where we're staying?" she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "No," I said firmly. "This is where Tyler was staying. You, Nicole, won't be staying here at all." Her smile faltered and she glanced at Tyler, who looked equally stunned. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, gesturing to the apartment around me, "is my home. Not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you to shack up in after stabbing me in the back." Nicole's expression turned icy, but she said nothing. Tyler, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode. "You can't do this!" he shouted. "You're being unreasonable." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Tyler. What's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges for now." Tyler stood in the doorway, his face red with frustration, while Nicole crossed her arms, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "You're being ridiculous, Amelia," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "This is my home, Tyler. The deed has been in my name for months, and you know that. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore." Nicole glanced at Tyler, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. "Wait, what's she talking about?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You said this was your apartment, that you sold it." He flinched, trying to wave her off. "It's complicated. I'll handle it." "Oh, it's not complicated," I said, stepping closer. "You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. That sale is void, Tyler. And as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on." Nicole's composure cracked. "You mean the money you told me you had—" She stopped mid-sentence, her voice rising. "Oh my God, did you lie about that too?" "Nicole, let me explain," Tyler said quickly, holding his hands up. But she wasn't having it. "No," I said, cutting him off. "Let me explain. Tyler tried to sell the apartment behind my back, thinking he could pocket the money and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know is that I had the deed transferred to my name months ago. So not only did he fail to sell it, but he also committed fraud by pretending he could." Nicole's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Fraud?" she whispered, taking a step away from him. "Are you serious?" "Yes, fraud," I said, crossing my arms. and I'm prepared to press charges if he doesn't get his things and leave by the end of the day. Tyler's facade finally cracked. You can't do this, Amelia, he said, his voice pleading now. We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out. You threw me out the moment you made that phone call, I said, my voice hardening. You told me you were divorcing me and laughed about me having to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, Tyler. You tried to ruin me. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim. Nicole took another step back, her eyes darting between us. This is insane, she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. You didn't tell me any of this, Tyler. You said you had everything handled. He turned to her, desperation written all over his face. Nicole, I can fix this. I just need... She cut him off with a raised hand. Don't, just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there, stunned. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. Looks like you're on your own, I said, turning back to Tyler. Now, let's talk about what happens next. He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Amelia, please. I screwed up. I know that. But you don't have to do this. You're right, I said, grabbing a folder from the kitchen counter and setting it on the coffee table in front of him. I don't have to do this, but I'm going to. This is the divorce paperwork. My lawyer has already drafted it, and I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, his face pale. You really hate me that much? Hate you? I let out a bitter laugh. No, Tyler, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything. Someone who loved you, a home we built together, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego. I stood, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he muttered. I'll go. Good, I said, walking toward the door. And don't even think about trying anything else. Chloe's already handling everything, and the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it. As I opened the door, Tyler slowly stood, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with defeat. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by a sense of relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I'd had made. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Tyler, would take it away from me again. The silence in the apartment after Tyler left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The space no longer felt heavy with his presence, his entitlement, or his lies. It was just me, the home I'd built, and the quiet realization that I had won, not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever had about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had been. His oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys that had cluttered the walls, and the gaudy coffee table he'd insisted on keeping were all gone. The apartment looked cleaner, brighter, like it was mine again. Lauren came by that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. Is he really gone? She asked, plopping down on the couch with a dramatic sigh. Gone and not coming back, I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue. Lauren raised her glass. To fresh starts and well-deserved victories. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week slowly lifting. To never letting someone walk all over me again. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite artwork into the living room, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about turning the apartment into a reflection of who I was, not the person Tyler had tried to make me. Chloe called with updates on the legal proceedings, her voice filled with the kind of confidence that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges are off the table since the buyer decided not to pursue them," she explained. "But the divorce paperwork is moving along smoothly. Once Tyler signs, you'll be officially free." Hearing the word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything I'd been carrying for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a marriage that didn't value me. It was all finally being lifted. Tyler tried to reach out a few times. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to pathetic attempts to guilt me into reconciling. "I made a mistake," one read. "Can't we at least talk about this?" Another was more desperate. "You're going to ruin me, Amelia. Is that what you want?" I didn't reply. For once, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. He'd made his choices, and now he was dealing with the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment felt like a completely new space, warm, inviting, and entirely mine. As I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling outside the window, I thought about everything that had happened. Tyler's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also been a wake-up call. For too long, I'd let myself believe that I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of respect and love he decided to throw my way. But now, I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, my life looked completely different. The apartment was unrecognizable, not because of any drastic renovations, but because of how it felt. It was a space that reflected me, my tastes, my personality, and my newfound independence. The absence of Tyler's clutter and his overbearing presence made the home feel lighter, freer. The divorce was moving along smoothly. Chloe had handled everything with precision, ensuring Tyler had no room to argue or complicate the process. He signed the papers without much fuss, likely realizing that he had no leverage. There was no grand showdown, no emotional plea to work things out. Just a cold, clean break that felt both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One day, as I sorted through some old papers, I came across a photo of Tyler and me from our early years together. We were smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. There had been good times, moments when I truly believed we were building a life together. But those moments were gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and put it away in a drawer. It wasn't worth keeping out in the open, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me anymore. Lauren and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "You're glowing," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I said. "It's the freedom. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." We toasted to that, and as the night went on, I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. I'd faced one of the hardest moments of my life and come out stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I started planning for the future. The apartment had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday, I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering shadows of my life with Tyler. Until then, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I had fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how Tyler had laughed during that phone call, so certain that he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I called the shots, one where I chose happiness on my own terms. And after a long time, I felt truly free.
My name is Jenny. and I am a 27-year-old office worker. I just got married 6 months ago. I met my husband, Victor, at a barbecue party thrown by a couple of colleagues from work. It seems that the event was set up as a place to meet, now that I think about it. A colleague invited some female friends from the office, and her boyfriend gathered friends from his student days. My father is the president of a company, and I was raised strictly since I was a child, with a curfew even through high school. I had never been to a mixer, and places with many people or many men made me nervous. That day, I was mostly talking to female friends from work when Victor first spoke to me. "Jenny, the meat is ready over here. You haven't eaten much, have you? Don't hold back, here you go." With a smile, he created a very easygoing atmosphere, and we quickly hit it off, and our conversation flowed smoothly. Thanks to him being good at livening things up, I naturally joined everyone's circle, and the day passed quickly because I had so much fun. On the way home that day, he asked for my contact details, and the next day, I received a message saying, "Yesterday was fun. I want to meet just the two of us next time." I mustered up the courage to reply, "Me too." And soon my phone rang, and he said, "Really? I'm so happy. When shall we meet? Where do you want to go?" My heart raced during such exchanges. Even when he asked me out at the end of our first date, I was so happy I immediately said yes. After several dates, he was driving me home one day, and when we arrived at the gate of my house, he seemed a bit surprised. I heard at the barbecue that Jenny was a young lady, but, wow, such a mansion. "Is your father the president or something?" "Yes, kind of." "Do you know the Hansen Group?" "Hansen. Who doesn't know it?" Wow, so Jenny is the daughter of a big corporate president. I'm not really a lady. Really, should someone like me even be dating you? If you have a fiancé or something, please tell me sooner. He said this seriously. What are you talking about? There's no such person, and I want to marry someone I love. I have 2 brothers, so I won't be taking over anything. Really? Really? Such conversations were only for that moment, and even after knowing about my family background, our relationship continued smoothly. And about a year later, he proposed, and I introduced him to my parents, and we got married. Even after we got married, he was kind. About a month ago, when my mother called to say that my father was not feeling well and was going into the hospital for tests, Victor stayed close to me, who was surprised and upset, and drove me there because he was worried. At that time, the test results had not yet come out, and my father said with a smile, "Sorry to worry you, I've just been busy and tired recently." However, that weekend, we were asked to gather at my parents' house. My brother's family, Victor and me, and my still single younger brother. This was the first time we had all been together since our wedding. A bad premonition crossed my mind, and sadly, it was correct. My father had cancer metastasis, and it was already at a stage where surgery was not possible. Really, I was surprised. They told me the test results would come in a week, but actually, they called me the next day. I received a life expectancy announcement. He spoke bravely, and my mother stood beside him, holding back tears. No way. I couldn't stop my tears, and Victor gently put his hand on my shoulder. My brothers also had faces of disbelief and could not immediately find words to speak. Even so, I'm not dying tomorrow. There's a lot I still need to do, not just for the house, but as the head of the company. I'll need a lot of help from you guys. It seemed he was mainly speaking to my elder brother. And Victor. My father then addressed my husband, who was comforting me. I'm sorry that this has happened when you're newlyweds. Please take good care of Jenny for me. Of course, Father. If there's anything I can do, just tell me. Moved by their words, I shed tears again. Due to my father's strong wishes, he decided to receive palliative care at home instead of being hospitalized. Fortunately, the medication worked well, and his willpower was strong. At first, he spent little time in bed, and my mother would say, "It's hard to believe he's seriously ill, he's moving around so much." He discussed the situation with secretaries, executives, and lawyers and continued to handle what needed to be done. My mother was of course devoted, and my brothers supported my father both personally and professionally. The heir, my elder brother, had built a house near our parents' home after getting married, and my still single younger brother was already living at home. I would visit my parents' house as much as possible after work, always rushing there on weekends. Victor joined me on the weekends, and on weekdays when I stopped by, he would tell me not to worry about cooking dinner. I was grateful for his support. One day, when I returned home after visiting my parents, he had already come back, and I could hear voices from the living room. Was it a phone call? I quietly entered the living room. I'm saying, probably soon. He won't last much longer. I thought I heard that and my heart pounded. What was that? What did it mean? Wow. Startled by my entrance, Victor exclaimed loudly and hastily ended the call. Oh, you're back? Yeah. Hey, who were you talking to just now? What were you talking about? It wasn't about my father, huh? What are you talking about? Of course not. I was talking about a game with a friend. Remember him, the gamer? But I heard something about not lasting long. He's in a gaming tournament. Apparently, he's struggling, and he was saying his opponent is about to run out of items and is in trouble. I see, sorry, I thought you were talking about my father and really got scared. Jenny. He gently grabbed my shoulder. It saddens me to be misunderstood like that. I'm worried about your father too and still wonder if there's a way to cure him. He said earnestly. Right, sorry, you are always so kind. I just came from seeing my dad, and I guess I was feeling down. I haven't been eating much lately. I see. I'm sorry you're going through this, and there's nothing I can do. But it's not good to always look so gloomy. Maybe you should go out for coffee with friends sometimes. You're right. Relieved by his behavior, I felt guilty for doubting such a kind person. And a month later, despite our family's hopes, my father passed away. My mother, brothers, and I made it in time for the last goodbye, which was a consolation. With so much to do one after another, there was little time to mourn. From the wake to the funeral, and at the company, my brother's appointment as president and the new structure that came with it, there was a lot to do. There was also talk with trusted senior executives, and no one opposed my still young brother's appointment as president. There are many people who will support us. My mother also felt relieved. My brother's character, and originally my father's serious care for the company and its employees, had its rewards. The next weekend, settled for the moment, the family gathered under the guidance of our consulting lawyer. The main topic was inheritance. It was announced that the 3 children would share the inheritance equally. The amount was approximately $3 million. I noticed Victor gasp next to me. I was surprised by the staggering amount, grateful, but I wished more than anything that my father could have lived longer. There was also talk about the company's rights and land, and it was decided to continue this discussion next time. Exhausted by the difficult conversations, when I got home, I told my husband, I'm going to rest a bit, and headed to the bedroom. Yes, rest well. About the inheritance discussion earlier, since no one opposed, does that mean it's decided? I think so, but why do you ask? Well, I was just surprised because the amount was larger than expected. It feels overwhelming. Yes, I was surprised too. Saying that, I entered the bedroom and lay down, feeling uneasy about his words. Larger than expected? I was vaguely thinking about it when I seemed to have dozed off a bit. I woke up and quietly headed to the living room. It's true, seriously. It's $3 million. No mistake. Wow, that's amazing. Well, it's fine. How much I've struggled and... Oh. Well, she's waking up, so I'll hang up now. Bye. Who? I asked him, trying to contain my turmoil, as he had been on the phone. It was my mother. She was worried about how you are, asking if you've started to feel a bit better. I see. Well, and, she wants to come over this weekend. Apparently, there's a new cake shop that opened, and she wants you to try their cakes. Sure, that's fine. Maybe I'll buy some nice coffee then. I smiled as I spoke, and he nodded happily. A definite suspicion had formed in my mind. The day before my mother-in-law was to visit, I stopped by my parents' house. Mom, how are you? Have you calmed down a bit? Yes, you don't have to visit so much. Amy also always comes by to check on me. Are you eating properly? Amy is my brother's wife, who is reserved but firm and caring. She was devoted to nursing my father and supported my mother during the funeral. I think my brother really married a wonderful person. Yes, don't worry about me, but actually, I have something I'd like to discuss. What's the matter? There's something that's been bothering me. As I drank the coffee my mother had made, I began to share my suspicions about Victor. The next Saturday, my mother-in-law arrived. She had attended my father's wake and funeral, and this was the first time we'd seen each other since then. Jenny, it's really unfortunate about your father. I brought some delicious cake to cheer you up even a bit. Thank you for your kindness during that time. Please come in. Let me make you some coffee. Oh, thank you. As the three of us were eating cake, Victor broached the subject. So, about the inheritance. Yes? Could you transfer the $3 million to my mother's account? What? It was a conversation that went far beyond what I could have anticipated. I was momentarily stunned. I don't understand what you mean. $3 million is a lot of money, isn't it? It's unsettling to have it, right? You're part of our family now, so I think it's best to transfer it to my parents' account. What? I couldn't understand at all. Are you asking to borrow some money? Like for a car or something expensive that's needed? Borrow? What are you talking about? It's our money now, my family's. Victor suddenly burst into laughter. My family's? Of course, the family Victor was born into and grew up in. Jenny, you've married into our family, so your money is our money, isn't it? The mother-in-law continued with a smile. I'll manage it properly for you. You can ask if you need something, but you have your salary, so you'll be fine, right? Wait a minute, I don't understand what you mean. Even if you say it's our money as a couple, why does it become your money? Because that's just how it is, it's our money now. Naturally, that includes my mother too. What? What are you talking about? Oh, don't worry, your family too, of course. First, we can build a big duplex house and buy a car, huh? We've got $3 million, so it's easy. Oh, Victor, you're getting ahead of yourself. But yes, I do want to get started on the duplex soon. Well, that's the situation, so transfer it to my mother's account now, will you? Please, Jenny. A daughter-in-law's money is our money. I was stunned by the true nature of these two. Far from a sliver of hope, it was worse than I could have imagined. Victor, did you marry me for my family's wealth? Huh? I really do love you. But it's Jenny with the wealth. When I heard you were a lady and started dating, it turned out to be a much bigger company than I thought, so I decided right away to marry you. That's right. I welcomed it too, and Victor has always cherished you, hasn't he? Was it all just to get my family's wealth? Oh, don't make such a scary face. When you marry, you become part of the husband's family, so it's natural to transfer the wealth, right? Well, it was lucky he got sick right after you got married. I was really surprised. I planned to cash in big time in the future, but I never expected him to go to heaven so soon. How terrible. Are you saying you were hoping my father would die? My body wouldn't stop trembling. He got cancer on his own, didn't he? If there's no saving him, it can't be helped. I just prayed he'd find peace soon. Yes, it's better for him to pass away quickly and leave the inheritance to his children than to suffer for a long time. Victor certainly had always treated me well. That's why I could believe it was a misunderstanding when I heard unbelievable words over the phone. I was deceived by a brilliant performance. Thinking back, a seed of doubt had sprouted in me at that time. But I thought it was natural for someone to get a bit carried away or expect some luxury when marrying into a wealthy family. However, this was not just any talk. Unforgivable, these scoundrels. Holding back my rising anger, I said. First of all, the money hasn't even entered my account yet. I can't transfer it. I've been told the procedure will take about another week. What? I thought it had already been deposited. Hurry it up. Well, but it seems you understand, Jenny. You're smart. Once the money is in, hand it over to me and leave the rest to me. Right, I'll give you my mother's account later. Transfer it as soon as you can. Saying this, my husband tried to hug my shoulder. I didn't even want to call him my husband anymore. I slipped out of his grasp and somehow kept my composure. Please come back next week. When I said that, my mother-in-law replied with a smile. All right. And left. And then the day came. I was going to make these vile people, who rejoiced at my father's death and aimed to seize his inheritance, realize their mistake. As soon as they barged into the house and took their seats, my mother-in-law spoke up. Jenny, has the $3 million been deposited? Have you transferred it to my account yet? Let's celebrate with steaks or barbecue tonight. Oh, that sounds wonderful. With $3 million coming in, I'll treat you tonight, Victor. Both were in high spirits. Of course, they thought they were about to get $3 million. Little did they know everything was about to turn upside down. Now, I have something to tell you. I smiled calmly. The process for renouncing the inheritance has been completed. What? True to form, the parent and child chimed in perfectly together. Their eyes widened in shock, were identical. What did you say just now? You said you renounced the inheritance. Yes, I renounced the inheritance. Stop joking. You wouldn't do such a foolish thing. Exactly. Who in the world would willingly give up $3 million? Well, normally, no. People often renounce inheritances when the debts outweigh the assets. Right, it's unthinkable not to accept an inheritance when there are no debts. The mother-in-law shrieked, her face twisted like a demon's. How scary. Oh, didn't you know? It's not so rare for heirs of family businesses to renounce inheritances to pass specific rights to a particular heir, to ensure stable long-term management. What? What did you do? She seemed at a loss for words. Well, of course, these greedy two wouldn't imagine passing money to someone else. In our case, my brother has taken over my father's position so suddenly. I plan to support him as his sister. But that doesn't mean you should give away the inheritance. You're being fooled, Jenny, used by your brother and his wife. Yes, exactly. Even the sister-in-law, she's after the wealth too. In their fluster, I snapped back coldly. Don't lump her together with you too. This was my decision. Both my brother and his wife said, "You don't need to renounce the inheritance, and she's a wonderful woman." If they told you that you don't need to renounce it, see, reconsider. I already told you, the procedure is completed. I will not receive the $3 million. No. No way. I have no intention of giving a single penny to a husband who rejoices in his own father-in-law's misfortune. Next to my pale-faced husband, the mother-in-law, also turning blue, suddenly looked up. Unbelievable. If the inheritance isn't coming, Victor, we need a divorce. We'll demand property division. What? I couldn't help but blurt out in astonishment. Of course, Victor did nothing wrong, and you renounced the inheritance on your own. Anyway, where's the proof that we rejoiced in your father's misfortune or that we were after the inheritance? We performed well at both the wake and the funeral. Such a quick talker. She even admitted to acting. If you need proof, didn't you just provide it in your words? Because no one else knows but you. Stop this foolish renunciation and apologize. Then I won't have you divorce. At that moment, a loud voice echoed in the living room. The one who should apologize is you. The calm male voice sounded, and the mother-in-law froze as she turned around. You. Why are you here? Dad. Victor was also stunned. There stood my father-in-law. I caught my mother's eye behind my father-in-law, and we nodded at each other. You've always been one to put on airs. You were so happy when Victor was going to marry Jenny, but I never imagined you were this kind of person. I couldn't believe that until I heard it with my own ears. Victor, you too. The father-in-law looked genuinely distressed. What? The mother-in-law and husband's eyes flicked back and forth in shock. It was last week that you came to Jenny with that foolish talk about handing over the inheritance. I heard everything you said at that time. What? You did? Everything has been recorded. Today too, of course. What? What do you mean? Victor shouted at me. You panicked a few times when I overheard your phone calls. You thought you'd managed to fool me, but I won't be deceived that easily. So, I set my smartphone to record when I heard your mother was coming. Indeed, the day before my mother-in-law was to arrive, I stopped by my parents' house and consulted with my mother and the lawyer. My mother was shocked, saying, "That can't be possible." But the reality turned out to be much worse, and I decided to renounce the inheritance immediately starting Monday. I also reached out to my father-in-law, who had not been around that day. My father-in-law, who used to enjoy playing chess and golf with my father, was shocked by his wife and son's outrageous behavior and kept apologizing profusely. I can no longer be with someone like you. You? No, this isn't what it looks like. Mr. Hansen was humble and had a wonderful human character despite being the president of a large company. I was happy to be his family and friend, but this is just. There's no excuse for their behavior. I'm deeply ashamed. He repeatedly apologized to me. Jenny, I am truly sorry. You can divorce immediately if you wish. Of course, I won't let anyone talk about property division or anything foolish like that. Hey, Dad. Quiet. Don't open your mouth anymore, you shameless person. If you have complaints, let's show today's and the other day's recordings to your colleagues and all our relatives. No way. My father-in-law took the last cool moment. But that's okay. When I spoke with my mother, my father-in-law apologized and cried, truly thinking of my father. With Victor and the mother-in-law speechless, their mouths agape, I said, "That's the situation. Please leave." 1 month later, Victor and I divorced. The rumors spread among the couple who had introduced us, and it seems Victor lost all his friends. He was reportedly reassigned to a small sales office far away. Victor's parents also divorced. The mother-in-law, who had freely spent the father-in-law's money on luxury goods and dining out, was told to agree to a divorce if she couldn't pay back the money she had used. As a housewife and a spendthrift, she had no other options. I thought, can't she say I'll get a part-time job and pay it back, so please don't divorce me? Her inability to reconsider and try again with the father-in-law shows her true character. Well, it's none of my concern anymore. The inheritance I relinquished is being used as capital for the company. My mother, brother, and even my younger brother laughed when they said they would pass on part of their inheritance to me or suggested redistributing it again. Having such a family is more than enough for me. Dad, I wasn't wrong, was I? Having moved out of the apartment I shared with Victor and returned to my parents' home, I spoke to my father's portrait. It seemed like my father in the portrait smiled, and tears rolled down my cheeks. Has that poor old hag finally kicked the bucket? I glared at the man, annoyed by his words. My ex-husband, who ran off with his mistress, leaving his blind mother behind. It was hard to believe he was the son of that once kind-hearted woman. His crude remarks brought my anger to its boiling point. You must have had it rough, huh? Well, now you're free. But, come on, someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right? His obnoxious laughter echoed as I smiled sweetly, hiding my fury. Yeah, I got the $3 million inheritance. So I'll be living freely from now on. The smile vanished from my ex-husband's face. Little did he know, soon he'd be on his knees begging for my forgiveness. My name is Emily. I'm 63 years old. I got married young and ended up living with my in-laws. They were kind people, but my husband was a disappointment. We divorced 10 years ago when I was 53. At that time, our eldest daughter, Mia, was 18, and our son, John, was 15, right when education costs were the highest. On top of that, my mother-in-law was blind. Taking care of the kids and my mother-in-law was far from easy. I met my husband, Tom, at work. I was 18 when I joined the company, and he was 24, 2 years out of college. He was older than me and seemed reliable, so I admired him. Tom was always looking after me when I was still inexperienced, and he had a caring nature. Despite being popular, for some reason, he took a liking to me and asked me out. When we got engaged, I visited his parents for the first time. His father had trouble walking, and his mother was blind. I was deeply moved, seeing how Tom supported them while managing his job. However, my own parents were against the marriage. They were worried that marrying into a family with obvious caregiving responsibilities would be too much for me. But Tom's parents were such wonderful people, and I was still young. I ignored my parents' concerns and went ahead with the marriage. My parents were so angry that they cut ties with me, but by then, I had a new family. When you're young, you feel invincible. Nothing seemed scary at the time. After we got married, I quit my job. I took it upon myself to care for my in-laws and manage the household, so that my husband could focus on his work. My in-laws were so grateful to me and treated me like their own daughter. They always expressed their thanks and never forgot to show their concern for me. Spending so much time with them made caregiving challenging, but it wasn't a burden. My husband worked late every day, and I believed everything was going well in our home. One day, I ran into an old colleague from work while coming back from the grocery store. Naturally, the conversation turned to my husband and me. My colleague said, "Tom is such a great husband. He always leaves work early because he says you're having a hard time. He's really something, isn't he?" I couldn't believe my ears. Tom never came home before 10 p.m. That was hardly early. It had to be some sort of mistake. Still, I couldn't say anything at the time. So I awkwardly smiled and replied, "Yes, that's right." Later that evening, I mentioned it to my husband, intending to test him a little. "You've been coming home late a lot lately. Couldn't you come back earlier? Your dad seems to feel bad about having me, a woman, help him with everything. At least you could help him with his bath." But before I could finish, Tom yelled at me. "What? I'm working. I'm not playing around. Tell Dad to stop being so picky." Your father didn't say anything. I just thought he might feel that way. It was clear my husband had no intention of helping with the caregiving. On top of that, he seemed overly defensive. I had a sinking feeling that my suspicions were right. But at the time, I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge it. I was afraid of what would happen if I pressed him and uncovered something I didn't want to know. After all, I had married him against my parents' wishes, and I had nowhere to go. I also worried about my in-laws. In the end, I decided to continue on with my life as usual. One day, I thought about getting an electric wheelchair for my father-in-law. He was using a cane and a regular wheelchair. But with an electric one, he could enjoy short walks. I imagined pushing my blind mother-in-law in her wheelchair alongside him, so we could all go a bit farther on our outings. I shared the idea with my husband, fully expecting him to agree. But his reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Really? Do we need that?" He looked pained as he replied. "I'm barely keeping us afloat on my income alone. Do we really need to waste money like that?" It was true we weren't wealthy. But I didn't see it as a waste if it made his parents even a little bit happier. "Then, how about we pay it off little by little using your parents' pensions? Maybe we could borrow a bit from the bank too?" At that, my husband seemed somewhat convinced and said, "Just don't make it my problem." Of course, I couldn't tell my in-laws exactly what he said. Instead, I told them that he'd agreed to let us take out a loan. And my father-in-law was delighted. We went to the bank together, got a loan, and purchased the electric wheelchair. My in-laws were very happy with it. However, not long after, my father-in-law passed away. Both my mother-in-law and I were heartbroken, but my husband muttered, "He just left us with debt. I told you we didn't need to buy it." I was sure my mother-in-law heard him. I felt incredibly guilty. It was just the two of us, my mother-in-law and me, living in the house now. Even though she was blind, there were some things she could manage on her own inside the house, which lessened the burden on me quite a bit. Around that time, my husband suggested we start thinking about having children. I had once doubted him, but hearing that, I convinced myself that I must have misunderstood something. We eventually had 2 children together. But unfortunately, my husband didn't change even after they were born. He still didn't care about anything related to the household. I was overwhelmed with housework and raising the children. But at least my mother-in-law seemed happy, which was a small comfort. Though she couldn't see the grandchildren, after my father-in-law passed away. Having the kids around seemed to lift her spirits. She'd been so down, but now she smiled more, listening to the children's lively voices. Despite everything, we managed to live happily enough. Still, just as my colleague once said, my husband continued to come home late from work. I'll never forget what he said at my father-in-law's funeral. He didn't show any love toward his mother or our children. Lately, he would even leave on his days off, saying he was going to work. And I'd stopped feeling any affection for him. I began to think that as long as he brought in money, that was enough. Our broken marriage continued like this. But our children grew up to be kind and thoughtful. The real change in our family came in the spring, when our daughter was 18 and preparing to go to college. I'm heading to work. It was a Saturday, a day he was supposed to be off. I stopped him before he left. You promised to take your mom to the hospital today. It was a promise he'd made just a few days earlier. Today was my mother-in-law's health checkup. And it was also the day we were set to get the keys to our daughter's new apartment, where she'd be living on her own during college. We'd known about these plans in advance. So I had asked him to take his mother to the hospital. What? That's your job as a housewife. He shouted at me. I told you, today's the day Mia gets the keys to her apartment. We need to set everything up for her before she starts college, and I said I'd go with her. When I snapped back at him, my husband got angry too. I had no memory of ever talking back or defying him before. The fact that I was standing up to him for the first time seemed to make him even more agitated. I didn't sign up for this. I married you because I thought I'd be stuck with an old man. And an old hag who no one else wanted. And now you want me to take care of her? If you can't take her, let her go by herself. I was speechless. How could anyone be this cruel? I had sensed for some time that he didn't care about his mother. But to suggest sending a blind woman out alone? And to insult me like that. It was unbearable to find out the real reason he had married me. I was filled with regret. That's enough. That's all I said to him, finally giving up on expecting anything from him. Satisfied that I didn't argue back, he said. All right then, you take care of the old hag and the kids. And with that, he left the house and never came back. In the end, our daughter had to handle getting the keys to her new apartment on her own and buy everything she needed for her new life. Meanwhile, I took my mother-in-law to her health checkup. Somehow, we made it through the day. Everyone noticed that my husband hadn't returned, but no one said a word about it. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from my husband. There was no return address, only his name. And inside was a divorce agreement and a brief letter. He wrote that he was living with his mistress now. Didn't want anything to do with the debt left by his parents. And told me to live my life without him. I was exhausted. If this is how things were going to be, cutting ties with him would make me happier. That's what I thought. Before submitting the divorce papers, I told my kids and my mother-in-law. The person who took it the hardest was my mother-in-law. I'm so sorry. She just kept repeating that, crying as she held my hand. I've been happy enough with you, Emily, and Mia and John. But once you're divorced, I'll be a stranger. I'll live on my own from now on. It'll take some time, but I'll move out. That's what she whispered. I responded a bit more firmly. You are like a real mother to me, and to the kids. You're their one and only grandmother. You don't need to worry about anything. Even if I divorce, we're still family. Let's keep living together just as we have been. Hearing that, she sobbed and thanked me. But I couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the back of my mind. Even if my husband was only an ATM, his presence had provided some financial security. Now, he was gone. I desperately looked for a job, but after years of being a housewife, no one wanted to hire me. Both Mia and John offered to work. When I was beginning to lose hope, my mother-in-law said, "Don't worry about anything. Let the kids go to school as usual. Emily, you don't need to work either. Leave it to me." We were puzzled by her words, but as she promised, nothing in our lives changed. In fact, we were living more comfortably than when my husband was still around. I submitted the divorce papers, and my mother-in-law wanted to file a missing person report for my ex-husband. But I didn't want to see him again. Still, I knew she wanted to see her son, so we filed the report. However, my ex-husband was never found. We continued to live as a family of 4, creating many happy memories. 2 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away and joined my father-in-law. She never got to see her son again. Even though he was her child, there was no way to contact him. When I managed to find his address, no one lived there anymore. We had a small funeral for her with just the 3 of us, and we said our goodbyes. And now, standing in front of me is my ex-husband. I was out shopping when he suddenly appeared in front of me. I thought I must be mistaken and tried to ignore him, but he kept staring at me. He recognized me. He must have thought the same, because he looked over at the much younger woman standing beside him and spoke up, showing her off. "Emily, right?" Still looking as miserable as ever. "That's a bit rude, huh?" The woman beside him giggled as she said that. It was clear they were mocking me, and I sighed. I was about to walk past them when my ex-husband said, "Has the poor old hag kicked the bucket?" I froze in my tracks and glared at him. "The poor old hag? Who are you talking about?" He snickered and replied, "You know who I mean. That blind old woman you were stuck living with. Heard through the grapevine she passed. Must have been tough for you, huh? Well, now you're free. Though for someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right?" His disgusting laughter echoed in the air. My anger reached its boiling point. But I knew that reacting now would only play into his hands. I forced a smile, hiding my rage. Yeah, I got $3 million from the inheritance. So now I'm living freely without having to work. Thanks for your concern. What? The smile disappeared from my ex-husband's face, though he had just been mocking me moments ago. Well then. As I tried to walk past him, he stood there dumbfounded. Then, in a panic, he called after me. Wait. $3 million in inheritance? What are you talking about? What do you mean, what am I talking about? I mean exactly what I said. Thanks for disappearing, by the way. It made the inheritance process go smoothly without you. My ex-husband's face turned pale. Good, I thought. I hadn't planned on telling him anything. But he deserved to know just how shallow and foolish he really was. You've got to be kidding me. I'm her son. How come I never heard about such a large inheritance? I should have a right to some of that money. I couldn't help but smirk at his words. Oh, but you weren't around. You know, right? If you go missing for 7 years, the law treats it as if you're dead. What? So, in your mother's will, the inheritance came to our son, our daughter, and me. There's no place for you anymore. He stood there, dumbfounded, his expression ridiculous. I nearly laughed out loud. It was only after my mother-in-law passed away that I realized she had planned this all along, asking me to file a missing person report for her son. The substantial inheritance my mother-in-law had left behind. A man who introduced himself as a lawyer came and explained everything to us. It turned out that my mother-in-law's family had been landowners. Like me, she had been estranged from her family, but she still had the right to inherit. When her parents passed away, she quietly took the inheritance without telling anyone. Thanks to her, we were able to live comfortably without worrying about anything. I remember asking her once, "Mother, how do you manage your money? If it's just from your pension, please feel free to spend it however you like." My mother-in-law smiled and said, "I'm spending it exactly how I want, living happily with my family." That's what she told me. From the way she used her money, I knew it wasn't just her pension. But it was her money, and given our situation, we gratefully accepted her generosity. The inheritance she received was far more than she could ever spend in her lifetime. The issue was my husband. If something had happened to her, he would have inherited everything. But she didn't want him to have it. When she discussed this with the lawyer, my husband disappeared. She felt it was a sign that he had severed ties with us. Although she was sad to be separated from us. She had planned to move into a nursing home, thinking she wouldn't burden us. And would spend the inheritance until there was nothing left. But both our son and daughter, as well as myself, insisted that she was family and that she should stay with us. My mother-in-law said there was nothing in the world that made her happier than that. My mother-in-law had wanted to leave the inheritance to us. So she followed the lawyer's advice and filed a missing person report for my husband. By law, after he had been gone for 7 years, he was considered legally dead. A year after that, my mother-in-law passed away. And her inheritance was passed on to her grandchildren, our son and daughter, in place of my husband. Although I wasn't entitled to inherit anything, my mother-in-law left a will that included me as a beneficiary. This way, we were able to receive what she had wanted to give us. You left, and your mother took care of everything. Mia's tuition, John's, and all our living expenses. Thanks to her, we were able to live happily. So, thank you for leaving. My ex-husband stood there, pale, his mouth gaping like a fish. Serves him right, I thought. After that, he started contacting us, ranting about how he was entitled to a portion of the inheritance. This from the man who had been completely silent for years. What a piece of work. People who are legally dead don't get a share of the inheritance. I told him that over and over. Still, he wasn't satisfied and demanded we sit down and talk. I consulted our lawyer. For him to claim any inheritance, he'd need to revoke the missing person declaration and go through a lot of legal procedures. In most cases like this, the grandchildren keep the inheritance. We had no intention of giving him a single penny. I relayed the lawyer's advice to him. If he wanted to inherit, he would also need to pay inheritance tax. When I told him to take care of all that, he fell silent. The kids were present during the conversation as well. I can't take time off work. I don't have time for paperwork. And inheritance tax? I shouldn't have to pay that. You guys should pay my share too. I supported you for years. The least you can do is handle this for me. His audacity left us speechless. Apparently, he was working a day labor job now. And missing even one day was problematic for him. The job he had while we were married? He got fired after repeatedly skipping work without notice. When I asked why he left that job and why he was struggling so much financially, he admitted he had debts, thanks to his former mistress. He'd been moving from place to place, working day-to-day jobs just to pay off what he owed. You understand, right? He said, but I couldn't muster even a drop of sympathy. That woman you were with didn't work out, huh? Then who was that woman I saw you with recently? Puffing out his chest, my ex-husband replied. She's the one I've been searching for all my life. He was clearly lost in his own delusions. Our son, John, was trying hard to hold back his laughter. Are you married to her? I asked. Well, no. We've only been together for 6 months. My ex-husband mumbled in a small voice. That was enough to send our son into fits of laughter. My daughter and I were too stunned to say anything, simply sighing at the absurdity in front of us. And what about the woman you left with when we got divorced? She left. Said she couldn't make me happy. He said it so casually, without even realizing that he had been dumped. He must have gone through woman after woman, never understanding the problem was him. You're not young anymore. Stop pretending you are, old man. I couldn't help but give him that piece of advice, feeling embarrassed for him. But she's the one, my soulmate. Hearing that, I realized that it was pointless to say anything more to him. At least I had found out his address after running into him again. He was living in the next town, in an apartment under a woman's name. My son, John, ended up buying the entire building and becoming the landlord. Grandma gave us that money, and it'd be a waste just to let it sit. I figured investing in real estate would be a smart move. That's what John said. I thought he might have done it to help his father, but that wasn't the case. In fact, if the rent was even a day late, John was quick to go and demand it. The previous landlord had been lenient, but not my son. Mom went through so much because of him. He chose this selfish lifestyle, so he should struggle more than you ever did. It was John's way of punishing his father. My ex-husband had never done anything fatherly for the kids, so it was only natural that they had their own feelings about it. Eventually, unable to endure his new life, my ex-husband came to me, fell to his knees, and begged for forgiveness. I'm so sorry. I was wrong to leave everything to you, including taking care of my parents and the kids. Seeing him like that made me sigh. He was desperate. But, I have my own life now. Couldn't you ask John to lower the rent just a little? He asked with teary eyes. It must have been tough for him. I don't know. If you had at least been a good father to the kids, things wouldn't have turned out like this. You failed as a husband, as a father, and as a person. Now, what do you have left? What was your life even about? You should think long and hard about that. With that, my ex-husband quietly left. His figure looked so small as he walked away. In the end, after repeatedly failing to pay rent, he was forced to leave the apartment. He moved into an old, drafty building that was about 50 years old. I heard he's still working day-to-day jobs, struggling to make ends meet. The soulmate he had been with when I saw him that day? Apparently, she left him when he moved out of the apartment. He had been paying her living expenses, and since he couldn't afford rent anymore, it wasn't surprising she left him. In fact, he should be thankful she stayed with him as long as she did. She was still young, and like me back then, she probably didn't see who he truly was. As for us, we're living happily now, thanks to my mother-in-law. Just like John said, we invested in real estate and stocks. And now we have passive income that allows us to travel and enjoy life. And Mia is getting married. Her fiancé is a kind man, and he treats me well too. Our family is growing, and our happiness will only increase from here. I can appreciate this joy all the more because we overcame such a difficult past.